Hello and welcome to today's Coffee with Cobb. Today we are talking about getting a handle on print costs with uniFLOW, a case study. In this presentation, we will be going over how we partnered with another organization to help them reduce their print costs, help their employees make some better print decisions, and overall make their print process a lot more economical and less wasteful. With us today, we have Mike Young, our Strategic Sales Executive, and Caitlin McDonald, our Business Improvement Specialist. And with that, let's take it away.
Thanks, Kate. Feels good to be back. It's been quite some time since I had the opportunity to jump on one of these Coffee with Cobb segments, but it definitely feels good to be here. And speaking of, for those of you who have already attended some of our previous Coffee with Cobb segments, for example, trading print for profitability, this should really come as no surprise. But for the rest of you, you may be shocked to know that on average, print is the third highest controllable cost for most organizations. Now, if you didn't know that, that's okay. You tend to fall in 9 out of 10 people or 90% of organizations that don't really know how much they spend on print or how many devices they have. And when you really think about the combination of these two metrics right here, these two stats, you can see that, the inability to see how much you're spending and the potential cost that you can put into it can really equate to a negative impact on a P&L statement. So Caitlin, it sounds like we need to look into some print management.
Yeah, of course. So print management is all about how critical it is for an organization to be able to understand what is driving those print costs. So that means looking at black and white versus color prints, what amounts each user or department is printing, and what devices get more demand than others. This is commonly a time that we really will look at what your set allowance is versus what that actual usage amount is, and understanding what the cost is associated with it. So as a business improvement specialist, when I see that a more in-depth print management is necessary for a client, I would then consult with one of our specialists like Mike. So next he's going to share a little bit more about what that evaluation looks like.
Yeah, and one of the things that we try to do is really stick to a tried and true process that we have to ensure that the recommendations that we make for our clients are going to be spot on. And there's really 5 different layers to this. The first and easily the most important is we have to be able to gain full visibility of the print environment. We have to know what we're working with right out of the gate to figure out how to proceed. Now, once we're able to kind of get a full view of all the devices, that are on location in the fleet and how much, they're pumping out, then we can kind of move to right sizing the hardware or the equipment to match the client's needs. And that's really important. Now, along the process, once we kind of gather that data, it gives us an opportunity to see if print management software is going to be required. Now, I will tell you, small or large business, the majority of the time, some sort of software is going to be required to help you manage that environment. Once we are able to really lock in on those 3, then we want to make sure that we partner up with the client and align on their goals and figure out what their expectations are. And once we map those out, kind of figure out where we're going, the last piece is going to be really planning for success, putting actionable items in place to make sure that we're staying on task. Now, as we move forward, when it comes to print management software, we feel very fortunate because we currently have 2 of the premier products on the market. In most cases, between PaperCut and uniFLOW, we have the answer to everybody's print needs. Now, in this case, in this print study, after really diving into the client's specific needs, we settled in on uniFLOW, which really met those. And that gave us the ability to track all their printing, reporting by many different ways. But the 3 that we really lock in on are going to be by department, which kind of gives us a broad view of their printing habits. Then we have the opportunity to dive into the individual users to see who their top printers are, and then we have an opportunity to move to their devices. Now, once we have that information, we have the ability to measure all the print devices on their network, which is really critical. And then once we have all that aligned and it's in place, we can really set up rules and best practices for them to move forward to ensure they're getting the most out of their print environment.
So for this case study, we were highlighting a senior living community that was a new client to us that we worked with through the proposal process for almost a year. So we completed 2 walkthroughs of their facility to not only hear what was going on with their print environment, but to see what was going on. This really provided our specialist with a look into what some of those day-to-day processes looked like, and really allowed us to take that consultative approach that the client was looking for during this process. So some of the top needs that were stated from this client were that they wanted more security on confidential documents. They also wanted to have that more 360-degree view of what their print usage looked like. And they wanted their users to be able to have access to multiple devices throughout their facility. When it came to our top 3 concerns that we focused on in order to make the best solution recommendations to this client, we were focused on authentication so that sensitive information would no longer sit unattended on the output trays. We also focused on rules-based routing, which is when a software evaluates what a user is asking to print, and it makes a suggestion of where to best send that print job that's going to be the most cost-effective. And we're also able to set privileges to users in certain departments. So say if one department has the privileges to print color versus another that's not needed. And then lastly, it was important for us to be able to have multi-level cost center reporting so that they could receive reports that were scheduled, broken down by device, department, and user.
You know, Caitlin, I always love looking at the slide, because when you look at what the client was looking for and then you look at our 3 major concerns that we have at the bottom, you can see they're in pretty much perfect alignment.
Yeah, exactly. So during our walkthroughs of their facility, we found a large variety of different models of devices, including a high amount of desktop printers, which again aren't very cost effective. So all of these devices were actually on various leases with different expiration dates, and it was really becoming hard for them to manage all of that internally. This also makes it a little bit more difficult to really truly know what your full print spend is. There was not much monitoring going on of what was being printed overall. So things are being printed out in color when it was not needed, like when you have that blue line under an email address. They were also directly printing to devices, which really increased the risk for sensitive information that was sitting on the output trays. There was also a lot of printing out of documents to scan right back in. Now, this is something that's common for a lot of different industries, and in most cases, this is just due to a workflow void that requires being addressed. So for this particular client, it required us to look into a fax solution that was able to alleviate their need to print to scan back in. So after our initial walkthroughs of their facility, we were able to perform a 30-day evaluation of their printing. And we found that their average usage was just over 300,000 for black and white, and a little under 62,000 for color. So while the percentage of color to black and white didn't seem too far out of line, the client felt that it was a lot higher than it needed to be. So Mike, can you share with us what we did with our findings to evaluate what was best for these recommendations?
Yeah, I'd love to. So now that we have a pretty clear picture on what we're dealing with in that print environment, now it's time to really move into how we're going to manage it moving forward. Now, when we dive into it, it really happens at 2 different levels. The first is it's going to happen at the human level, the people level, and it really comes down to managing print behaviors. Now, as we dove into the numbers, we always like to start at the department level before we move to the user level. And the reason is it's going to give you very quickly, looking at that report, which we'll get to in a minute, It'll show you right away, which departments have the highest output, which may be running with a higher color percentage, which are only printing one-sided instead of duplex where they shouldn't be. So once you have that, you can kind of figure out where you want to start first. It's also important to realize that you can't tackle it all at once, specifically in a large environment with a large fleet. You really want to pick and choose where your time is best served out of the gate and kind of go from one to the next. Now, you always want to start with the highest output departments and then move to, the users that are using the most. And the reason is, a 10% swing in color prints or a, 20% reduction in overall output in a department that does 30% of your total output, it's going to have a much larger impact on your overall savings than even 30% in a much smaller department. So you want to start there. Now, once we move past the print behaviors and the human side, then we start to really dig into managing the fleet. And we'll look at it by device and by location. What we want to ensure is that the outputs on the machines match the expectations that we had at the very beginning and the capabilities of the machine. We want to ensure that we're not burning out a machine by overusing it at one location while we may be underutilizing one at another location. And in those cases, it may be time to maybe swap devices or move them to a better location. Next, Caitlin. She's going to share one of our most common reports and kind of go over some of the things that we saw.
Yeah, so this here, you're seeing an example of a report. So this is a scheduled report that the department leaders receive on a monthly basis. So this really allows them to understand where their print costs are coming from, and they can make adjustments as needed. So as you can see here, we starred some of the top departments that stood out to us. So for example, Department A, here they have a high volume of their overall printing. They're definitely using a lot of color. And it is important to note that the average color print can cost 5 to 6 times the amount of black and white. Now, if you look at Department C, they have a much higher output of color versus black and white. So this is another thing, important thing to address to this client. Now, if you look at Department D, they have a large amount of copies, which this runs the risk of what we like to call orphan prints. So these are prints that aren't picked up on the copier or used when they are printed or copied. So for example, if you have a large event where you're making a lot of copies, and then after that event, you're having to throw away a lot of those unused copies. So all in all, we always recommend investigating the departments whose changes can yield the greatest amount of savings. So Mike, why don't you share with us a little bit more about what their print environment looks like now?
Yeah, this is always my favorite part, right? Kind of the brass tacks. So a little bit earlier, we shared kind of the starting point with this specific client, and they were averaging, 294,000 black and white prints per month, and then the color was coming in at 62,000. Now, there are going to be areas of success. There are going to be areas that we need to work on here, and that's how it always works. And it's important to note that we're still, we basically just hit the first year into going into the second year, and we still have some things that we'd like to accomplish. Currently, those black and white prints are just over half at this point, and that's pretty remarkable, coming in at about 162,000 a month. Now, you'll notice the color is actually higher. Oddly enough, COVID last year kind of created an environment where they actually utilized more color, and we're in direct contact with them, and that was actually expected in our conversations. Now, when you look at the end goal, the targets that we put forth, we're really close on black and white, and we feel that as things move forward and we start to make some of the adjustments that we spoke of earlier for color, and over time, we're going to really help them kind of lock in on that 40,000 end goal for color. Now, even with it being over on color, you look at the estimated annual savings, we really came in looking to save about $80,000 a year, which is a substantial amount of money. At this point, we are averaging right around $61,000 in savings for this client. So we are we are definitely on track to get them there. And if you think about it as an organization, if you're able to put that level of money to the bottom line, that's a huge win. It's also important to really go back and think about all the different things that needed to take place to get them there. You know, really gaining visibility of the print environment, right sizing the hardware to make sure it's a good fit for them, getting the software, aligning on goals and planning success. All of that comes down to two things. You know, we can't urge the client anymore to slow down before they speed up. We know on these leases that you want to get in there and get them done and move on as an organization, but it's important that you really partner with someone that's going to be equally as committed to your success as you are. If you see your rep about as often as you vote for the presidency, it may be time to start looking for someone better, someone like Caitlin, who's about to bring us home here discussing the advantages of print management.
Thanks, Mike. Yes, seeing these reports actually helps my job performing account reviews so much more enjoyable. So seeing these metric reports, we were able to evaluate the data and directly ask questions to dig deeper into what is going on with the increased printing and trends. So for example, for this client, the majority of their color printing was coming from one specific department within their organization. So we were able to ask questions based off the data that we saw, and we discovered that there was a high volume document being printed on a weekly basis that had a high amount of color on that document. So we were able to evaluate an example of the document and what it looked like and provide a variety of recommendations of how to reduce the color used in the document. With these detailed reports, we were also able to look at the specific devices and the average usage put on each. So some of the devices are over what the recommended monthly volume levels are, and many of them are also under. So we're able to assist with investigating if a printer in a specific location is really necessary. And then also with some of the executives and the department leaders seeing these reports on a monthly basis, the organization is able to gain a lot more support from their employees when they're wanting to implement new initiatives. So rather than just immediately jumping to increase their monthly allowances, we have a lot more insight with these metrics to ask more questions and first utilize other options. For example, this client is looking at implementing a green initiative to help reduce their carbon footprint overall throughout the organization. Our next steps to reduce costs would to be transition from soft to hard output management with implementing that rules and routing. As mentioned earlier in the presentation, and this would help, again, drive the cost down. So in closing, it has been so empowering to have a client that was so motivated to take control of their printing from the start. We really have witnessed this facility take a 180-degree flip in just a year with the technology that they've implemented, and it's greatly reduced their print spending. So this is a case study that we really hope that more clients and prospective clients could see that can make a lot of changes for them as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us today. We are now in the Q&A section of Coffee with Cobb. So while we're waiting for some questions to roll in, Mike or Caitlin, I've got a question for y'all. What is the most challenging part of this process for the client?
Do you want that one, Caitlin, or do you want me to grab it?
You can go ahead.
Okay. Kind of discussed earlier, I think the most challenging part for them is making it a priority and really slowing down to speed up. You know, the one thing that we realize for all of our clients is their time is precious, right? You know, they're trying to drive a business and their time is constantly spent before they even have it. But it is important to really set the time aside to be able to go through the process that's set forth, because in the end, there is definitely an opportunity to take all the other things that you're doing throughout your day that are so important in making your business more profitable, and that's always the goal. So I would say slowing down, sticking to the game plan before you speed back up.
Awesome. So still waiting a little bit longer for any questions to roll in. I might be having some technical difficulties, we'll see. Okay. We've got some rolling in now. A lot of questions rolling in. Must have been a little bit of a internet problem. Cool. Okay, so Sal has the question, can you stop my employees from printing to their DeskJet printers?
Sure. There's a couple different ways that we can do that. The first is, and actually, you know what, Caitlin, why don't we talk about right sizing the equipment on this one? Do you want to go ahead and take it?
Yeah, of course. So this is kind of similar to this specific client. So they again had a number of desktop printers in various single employee offices. So it's a lot. It comes down to the ease of just turning around from your desk or having a printer on your desk to print. But again, that's not the most cost effective, especially if you're doing a print job that's more than 3 to 5 pages. So that is something that we would evaluate of what exactly are they printing to those printers. And it may be they don't really print too much, or they're really printing more high volume jobs. So that's a case to really look at. It may be more efficient to get rid of that desktop and put in a MFP, or there may be an MFP just a few steps away from their desk. And then this is something too where we can, that's where that rules-based routing comes in for more output management.
Yep, it forces them. Just on top of that, a lot of people don't realize this as well, but a lot of those little desktop printers that you see, you know, it's not uncommon for the color print to run anywhere from 35, 40, even up to 50 cents a print. So, you know, if we walk into an environment and we see a bunch of those spread out all over the place, I promise you the convenience doesn't outweigh the loss of profitability in those environments. And those are the things that we look at when we do a print study and we come in, we map all that out for you so that you can really see how much money is spent in those areas. That's a great question.
Next question, we've got Jojo with how much does it cost?
The process?
I'm guessing,
yeah.
Word for word, how much does it cost? So
not $1, but it does cost your time. So, you know, this is a complimentary service we do for our clients and future clients, but it will take some of your time. So as long as you're willing to invest in taking the time to get a hold on your print environment, we are willing to put the time in to help you get to where you need to go.
Awesome. Next up is Anonymous with, I like how these reports look, but we only have a total of 3 devices. Is this something you can do?
I can take that question. So both of these software, so we're here in this case, we're talking about uniFLOW, but another software that we typically have experience with is PaperCut. And so any of these solutions are good for any lower volume or any smaller organization that doesn't have a lot of devices. We really see the use for this type of software in a lot of law firms, anyone that has any sort of contract management, as well as a lot of real estate. And so you don't necessarily have to have that high volume. You just have to have that need. And this could provide a cost savings for any size organization.
Thanks, Caitlin. Last up, we've got Anonymous with, you really emphasized lowering color usage, but even with color increasing, the spend went down. What was the major contributor to their savings?
Yeah, that's a great question, because that would be the first thing I would have noticed in this presentation. So I'm glad we got that. It really goes back to looking at all of it's really the sum of all parts, you know, looking at the hardware, looking at the color output, overall output. In this case, even though the color is still kind of out of whack at this point and we're pulling it back, you saw those significant savings in the black and white prints. I mean, it was just over half, and that's a pretty considerable savings in that area. But on top of that, when we were doing the walkthrough, and, Caitlin, I'll give you a tremendous amount of credit here. We never go into an environment and look to go 1-for-1 on equipment. We don't just take what's there and pick the most applicable, comparable model and just push it in there. So, a good amount of that time was spent making sure that the devices were right for the environment. And Caitlin, you could probably shed a light a little more on the hardware and some of the changes we made there, because I know that was a pretty considerable amount of the savings as well.
Yeah, so just getting rid of a lot of those desktop printers that were not necessary. Like Mike had mentioned before, those desktop printers typically have a higher click rate if it's under a service contract. Or the toner cartridges that go into those devices do cost a lot more. And then it's important to note that a lot of times when something goes wrong with those devices, sometimes it just makes more sense to go ahead and replace the whole printer rather than taking the time and that cost to repair any parts within it. I think another thing that's important to note here is it's not only just about their cost. We've greatly increased the amount of time, their uptime of their devices, as well as just having a technology environment that is a lot more in line with the services they're wanting to provide to their clients. So that's a big piece that we've given back to them as well, is their uptime.
Awesome. So that's it that we have for questions right now. So if you do have a question, feel free to post it in the chat and we will make sure that we get to it. While we're waiting, just a reminder to all of our attendees here today that if you don't have a chance to ask a question, you can always email us at coffee@cobbtechnologies.com. And if you want to rewatch this episode of Coffee with Cobb, you can do so at our Coffee with Cobb archives at cobbtechnologies.com, and the tab will be right up there at the top. So if you do have any questions, we've still got a couple minutes here. And while we're waiting, Mike or Caitlin, Mike, you mentioned that your favorite part of this whole process is seeing the actual, the fruits of your labor.
That's right.
Caitlin, what's your favorite part of this process?
I think it's just being able to walk through their facility and being able to see what goes on. Because this was a larger client, we spent a good part of our day walking around and seeing all the different departments. And so that's really, really critical and not something that we always get to see. A lot of times we're only seeing what goes on in an office for 5 to 10 minutes. So being able to have that time and have them dedicate that time to us as well to talk to some of those department leaders throughout the process really helped us, again, to take that more consultative approach and not just replacing everything 1-for-1.
Awesome. Well, we are at the end of this episode of Coffee with Cobb, so thank you to both Caitlin and Michael for presenting this. If you do have any questions that we didn't have a chance to get to, you can always email us at coffee@cobbtechnologies.com. And we just want to say thank you for showing up today. We really appreciate it. And we hope you have a good Thursday. Bye.